On the evening of April 2nd, 1968, a Muslim bus mechanic was working across the street from St. Mary's Coptic Church in Zeitun, a district of Cairo, Egypt. Suddenly, something on the roof of St. Mary's got his attention, a figure that looked like a young woman. The mechanic pointed it out to a few people nearby who saw the same thing. Concerned that the young lady was about to commit suicide, they called the police. The crowd gathered around the church to watch, then after just a few minutes, the woman suddenly vanished. As you can imagine, this got people talking. First, the police tried to explain things away, saying that it was just some strange light reflecting in a weird way from the streetlight, but many weren't persuaded. A week later, the female figure appeared on the roof again. The appearance of the woman lasted for a few minutes and then disappeared. Some people began to connect the dots. This is St. Mary's Church. The church is believed to be one of the locations that Jesus' family stayed during their flight to Egypt. We're seeing a shining female figure on the roof. Surely this must be the mother of Jesus. From there, the appearances began to happen more frequently, at times lasting for hours. In some reports, the apparition appeared to be bowing toward the cross atop the church or blessing onlookers on the street below. The Coptic Orthodox Pope appointed a committee of high-ranking priests and bishops to investigate. On May 4th, the church issued an official statement confirming the apparitions is genuine. The apparitions were witnessed even by the Egyptian president. Some were recorded on film by newspaper photographers and Egyptian television. Police investigations found no apparent explanation. No device was found within a radius of 15 miles capable of projecting the image, and many photos were taken of the alleged apparition from independent sources. With no alternative explanation and approval from religious and political leaders, the Egyptian government accepted the apparitions as true. So why in the world am I talking about the Marian apparitions of Zeitun? It's because biblical scholars like Allison and Bart Ehrman attempt to parallel these experiences with Jesus' resurrection appearances. In fact, Allison says they are in some ways better evidence, and yet he remains agnostic about them. Allison writes, "Our knowledge of what happened in the days after Good Friday is depressingly sparse over and against our knowledge of what happened in Zeitun. With respect to the latter, we have interviews with multiple eyewitnesses, we have photographs, we have on-the-spot, as it unfolded, journalistic reports from religious and irreligious. We have a statement from an investigative committee. We have none of this by contrast with respect to Jesus' resurrection, only a lamentable paucity of evidence and lack of detail at every turn. One wonders how, if we cannot solve the puzzle of Zeitun, about which we know so much, we can solve the puzzle that is Jesus' resurrection, about which we can know so little." Bart Ehrman agrees with Allison. He seemingly points out some inconsistency among the resurrection apologists like William Lane Craig, Gary Habermas, and Mike Licona. Ehrman writes, "It is striking and worth noting that typically believers in one religious tradition often insist on the evidence for the miracles that supports their views and completely discount the evidence for miracles attested in some other religious tradition, even though, at the end of the day, it is the same kind of evidence, for example eyewitness testimony, and may be of even greater abundance. Protestant apologists interested in proving that Jesus was raised from the dead rarely show any interest in applying their finely honed historical talents to the exalted Blessed Virgin Mary." While Ehrman doesn't call them out by name, these three prominent resurrection apologists are all committed Baptists. When an emailer asked about the parallel between Marian appearances and Jesus' post-mortem appearances, Dr. William Lane Craig had his colleague Mike Licona respond to the reader's question. Licona wrote, "In my debates with Ehrman when he has raised the topic of Marian apparitions, I've responded that I do not doubt that the recipients saw something. What they saw is what I question." Elliot Miller and Kenneth Samples co-authored the book The Cult of the Virgin, Catholic Mariology, and the Apparitions of Mary. In this book, they discuss three major accounts of Marian apparitions: Lourdes, France, Fatima, Portugal, Medjugorje, Croatia. I know Samples personally. He has interviewed several of the seers to whom Mary has appeared to in Medjugorje. Although Samples is a Christian whose Protestant theology does not incline him to believe that Mary has appeared to others, he is convinced that these seers have seen a spirit being. In fact, I had an opportunity to inquire further of Samples on the matter. He told me that several of the seers in Medjugorje continue to have visions of Mary. In fact, he was with one of the seers while he was experiencing such a vision, although no one else in the room saw her. Samples told me he asked the seer if Mary had spoken to him. The seer said she had, recommending a specific book which the seer was to read. When Samples looked up the title of the book, it was occultic. This led him to believe that a demonic spirit is what is appearing to the seers. I'm sure that the "it's the devil" hypothesis will probably offend most Catholic Christians, and I'd bet that Ehrman would be content to let them fight it out amongst themselves. Pitting Catholics versus Protestants is a classic move made by skeptics going back to the deist controversy in the 17th and 18th century. Rather than denying the evidence, Licona refers to Samples' theological argument, which seems to be based on some personal anecdotes and doctrinal inferences. Even if you're theologically opposed to the veneration of Mary, This evil spirit hypothesis might be giving the devil more credit than is actually due. While I myself am a settled Protestant, I'm not automatically inclined to say that all Marian apparitions are either delusions, hoaxes, or demonic just because of my prior theological commitments. With enough evidence, my mind could conceivably be changed. But I don't think that the Marian apparitions come anywhere near what we have for the evidence for the resurrection. It's actually more of an apples versus oranges comparison. Allow me to explain. What would convince me of Marian apparitions? Well, let's think about it. Imagine if Mary appeared to a dozen people and ate several meals with them, and they touched her hands and she conversed with them. Now, also suppose that this group was made up of 12 Protestants, living in a country where converting to Catholicism could result in their arrest, torture, or death. That would move me a bit closer to accepting them. But there is a big problem. No one who has seen an apparition of Mary knew Mary personally before she died. Sure, there's a tradition that she appeared to James, the son of Zebedee, in Spain in 40 AD, but the evidence for this tradition is rather thin, and Mary was probably still alive at that time. Those who believe in this appearance claim that she was supernaturally present in two places at once. The very first recorded Marian apparition, approved by the Catholic Church, was in 1555. Obviously, Mary hasn't been known by anybody personally for centuries, so there's always at least the possibility that someone could be hoaxing these people in this proposed scenario. Speaking of being hoaxed, and pardon this cheesy segue, but I would like to take a minute real quick to thank this video's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Are you on the internet as much as I am? Of course you are. I mean, you probably had this video suggested to you because you were hanging out on YouTube for too long. Problem is that marketers, data brokers, internet service providers, and other companies want to track your every move and sell your data to the highest bidder. This is where a VPN comes in handy. A VPN helps keep your browsing habits to yourself by rerouting all your traffic through a secure tunnel so digital entities aren't allowed to snoop on your behavior. For example, have you ever noticed that your Facebook ads will change after you mention something in a conversation? Or maybe you ask Google an embarrassing question and later on you're scrolling through social media and you get embarrassing advertisements? You can hide your IP and stay anonymous online with Atlas VPN because it encrypts all your traffic with a high-grade encryption. You can enjoy top-notch privacy and protection with just one click. Right now, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount, which means that you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.83 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Be sure to get your deal by clicking the link in the video description down below. Okay, now where were we? Yes, hoaxes. People laughed when Robert Greg Cavan came up with his twin brother theory to explain away the resurrection. But Cavan had to come up with a theory to explain why the disciples thought that they saw the risen Jesus, as they knew what Jesus looked like. They had hung out with him for 3 years. But some might say that perhaps what the apostles saw was akin to something like what the people saw in Zeitun. Maybe they experienced something like a bright light on a rooftop that they mistook to be Jesus, and enthusiasm took its course from there. The problem with that is that we can't say that if we take the gospel account seriously. The gospel accounts report multi-sensory group appearances extended across 40 days. These appearances involve conversations with Jesus, touching his wounds, and eating fish together. These aren't the kind of things that you can be easily mistaken about. Ehrman and Allison think that these accounts are embellished and unreliable, and that is why they run this parallel. It's not that they don't think the disciples experienced appearances of Jesus of some sort, they do. That's because of what Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, that Peter, the 12, Paul, James, and an unnamed 500 brothers all claim to have seen the risen Jesus. But what the appearances were like is not something that Paul goes into detail about. If the best evidence that we have for the resurrection is the creed that Paul quotes to the Corinthians, then we're left with a pretty vague report. Or to use Allison's words, depressingly sparse. Vague appearances that were overinterpreted by the disciples would be consistent with the creed in 1 Corinthians 15. So, if we're going to defend the resurrection, we're going to need to defend the detailed reports contained in the Gospels are what the disciples reported. But because Licona will only use facts that 90% plus of scholars agree upon, which include the likes of Allison and Ehrman, he's not actually able to do that. For example, counter-apologist and skeptical YouTuber Apologia asked if there was possible embellishments in the Gospel reports, and this is what Licona had to say.
Do the Gospels, in terms of the appearances of Jesus, do they contain any legendary elements? Well, that's impossible to know, I think.
This is why I am not a fan at all of the minimal facts approach. If we're willing to say that the appearances to the Emmaus disciples or Thomas are impossible to know historically, because that's what scholarly consensus allows us to say is a minimal fact, then there's a massive problem. But if we look at the Gospels more closely and fairly, I think we can know with great confidence that they are scrupulous, habitually honest, and close up to the facts. They were not the kind of authors who were prone to embellish things, nor were they likely to be schizophrenic authors, showing all the signs of truthful testimony, but suddenly at other times considering themselves free to invent and change facts. So it looks like what they recorded recorded is what was originally claimed by the witnesses of Jesus' resurrection. And this was the apostles' claim in the midst of persecution, so it would be unlikely that they were just inventing things or making things up. See my playlist on the reliability of the Gospels for more. So, getting back, finally, to Marian apparitions, I don't think that it's at all impossible to have evidence that has strong weight for Marian claims. Let's suppose that two Protestants who had previously publicly criticized Marian doctrines both claimed at the same time of having seen a vision of a woman claiming to be Mary, telling them that she was taken bodily into heaven. Neither of these two men had a prior history of mental illness. They both destroyed their own Protestant careers and endangered their lives by claiming this. Furthermore, suppose the woman in question instructed them to call each other and ask each other, "Did you have any strange experience in the last 24 hours?" And they independently did this. That would be very strong evidence of the Marian claims, but it still wouldn't be an exact analogy to Jesus' resurrection appearances on earth. It would probably be more analogous to the conversion of Paul and James. Oddly enough, Dale Allison says that nothing short of Mary appearing to him himself would convince him. I don't think that our standards need to be that absurdly high. This whole Marian apparition analogy just doesn't work when one takes a more maximal data approach to the Gospels. I might not be able to explain away all Marian apparitions, but they're not the same as the resurrection appearances in the Gospels, and I would hope that Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox and Coptics would all agree upon that. At best for me, Marian apparitions make me say, maybe the world is a weirder place than I thought, but I don't really know what to make of this. But because there seems to be some vagueness about what these apparitions mean and where they originate from, I don't feel super inclined to believe them. Thank you so much for watching.